introduce a woman who is the president of the Friends of the Library. She has a couple of things to tell you, and then we'll get started. Doris Robesky.
And I'm sure it's only going to be a couple. First of all, I don't know how many of you know of the Friends. The Friends of the Library is an independent group associated with the library, and our purposes are to assist the library in whatever way we can, financially and otherwise. Our group is currently involved with the lecture series. We are assisting with the refreshments and in providing hostesses for each of the lectures. We've also used as our main source of income our book sale, which is held at the library, and we have now introduced a mini book sale up here with the collection of books which are for sale for $1 a piece. We'd also like to invite any of you who are not members of the Friends to join us, because all of our efforts are used to assist the library in the purchase of equipment, in the purchase of materials, in sponsoring the children's programs, and in assisting in any way that we can. For those of you who aren't familiar with what we've done, I just would like to point out that last year our organization returned to the library in various ways over $11,000. We hope that those of you who don't know about us will think about us. We have membership cards available up here. We will have some in the other rooms if any of you would like to join our association, and also to help us in beginning some of these programs. Penny has done a great job, as you know, and we're happy to help her. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Penny Wright, and I'm the program coordinator for the Rogers Memorial Library. And on behalf of the staff and trustees of the Rogers Library, I'd like to welcome you all here this evening for an evening about Southampton's Black history. I'd particularly like to thank a couple of people here tonight who've done a lot of work. One is Lisa Bowen. Can you raise your hand, Lisa? I'd like to thank Lisa. She's been a big help in every aspect of this evening's program, from doing research to helping us find people to be here with us tonight, to preparing the bibliography, which you'll find across the hall on a table that you can browse through at the end of the program. Peggy Cause, I don't know what Peggy is. Right here. Peggy has also been a big help, because you will see the biggest and most great-looking coconut cake, which was made by Peggy and her husband. Junie Wingfield was also very helpful to us. He's not here this evening, but he wishes he could be. In front of you this evening are 5 members of Southampton's African American community. Each has lived here for many, many years, and each is not only highly esteemed by the black community, but by the larger community as well. We believe that each of our guests will help illuminate some facet of the black experience for us tonight. When I sought his advice about who to have on our panel, Junie Wingfield told me that if you want to know about the black history of Southampton, you have to know about the churches and their influence in shaping the life of the black community. With this in mind, we invited Reverend Marvin Dozier, on your left, to be here with us tonight and serve as moderator. He is a pastor of the Unity Baptist Church in Mattituck. He's a former director of the Bridgehampton Child Care Center and has currently been the director of the Southampton Youth Association for 20 years. And he's also a father and husband. On his left is Roxanne Dozier, who some of you may know for her 23 years of work as a monitor and cashier at the Southampton Elementary School. Roxanne has been a lifelong resident of Southampton. She's taught Sunday school at the First Baptist Church since she was 14 years old, and is a wife and the mother of 3 grown children and the grandmother of 6. Next to her is Barbara Turpin, who, like Roxanne, was born and raised in Southampton. Highly praised within her own community for her high standards of parenting 5 grown children and her quiet, behind-the-scenes strength, Barbara has been active in church life and has also worked for 35 years as a housekeeper for a family on Ox Pasture Road. Noah Simmons, next to Barbara, is our only guest who was not born in Southampton. Noah is from Currituck, North Carolina. He moved here in 1938 and started his own landscaping business. In 1970, Noah established an association of black businessmen and was seen as a role model for many young blacks growing up in Southampton during the 60s and 70s. Noah has also been active in the life of his church and is a husband and the father of 5 daughters. Our last guest is Harry Martin, last but not least. Harry is a senior member of this group, and he's a familiar face to many of you, no doubt, because he always carries the American flag in the July 4th parade. Harry can trace his roots way back and has a very sharp memory about the past. He attended the Southampton schools and graduated in 1935 with Doug Morris, Henry Hildreth, Arthur McGowan, Ethel Sanford, Helen White, and Bessie Wellens. He is a decorated veteran of World War II and a lifelong resident of Southampton, as well as the father of a daughter who lives in Richmond, Virginia. We'll begin with Reverend Dozier, who will spend a few minutes giving us some general background about black history in Southampton, and then we'll move on to hear some things about the lives and stories of our 4 guests. We'll begin now, so please join us in welcoming them to us.
Good evening, everyone. I must say first to those that are over here behind me, I apologize for my back being to you. But we are very fortunate tonight to come and to share with you some of the history of our black community. I want to start with a quote from Frederick Douglass. He says that it is better to be a part of a great whole than to be a whole of a small part. And we who live here are part of a really big community and a great community. And so we're really happy to be here today. Our roots date back to 1698. For in 1698, the census records shows us that there were 40 black men and 43 black women. The women still outnumber the men. There are many historical events that have occurred and have gone on, and I want to share maybe 2 with you. In 1814, on Mr. Peltro's farm, there was a gentleman born by the name of Pierce Concert. Pierce and Concert traveled with Makeda Coover and traveled to Japan and owned a home down on Agawam Lake. And there in the park, just recently, we were able to put a stone to mark the place where his boat came in. What he did, he, as a sailor and as a whaler and as part of all that sea experience, he traveled back and forth on the boat, and he had a little taxi, a water taxi, where they would bring in the bigger boats, and he would bring them into Agawam Park. Well, Pierce Concert belonged to the Presbyterian Church, which at that time there was no black churches in Southampton, and he was a very distinguished member of that. One of the things that I learned recently, well, I should say a few years ago about him, is that Pierce Concert traveled into Japan, and arriving into the harbor there, they had never seen a black man, and so they were really fascinated with his skin and his color and all of that. And today there is a bust of Pierce Concert in the harbor. Then in 1908, there's a very interesting story told of a lady by the name of Mrs. Moses Solomon. And Mrs. Moses Solomon was in the fact of giving birth to her first child. And there was no hospital here. And they got together in the Mansion House on Hampton Road, and she became one of the first people to be cared for, and which was the beginning of Southampton Hospital. And it was soon after that they moved Southampton Hospital. They bought property over where it presently is and has expanded. But when one looks at those rich histories and we see that we have had a presence here and that we've been part of the community for a very long time, we really begin in 1916 with Bethel Church. And the church becomes very important because it was probably then that we began to really get some of the first written history of what was going on here in Southampton. Bethel Church was a very interesting history in that there were those blacks that were living here who were part of the Presbyterian Church, and they had decided that they needed to form their own church, and it was Bethel Church, which became that first church here in the village of Southampton. And from that, we began to develop some very rich lives. A lot of blacks have traveled or migrated here from the South, and they've come and they've worked on the farms. There were families that were here prior to those that were coming. And I think tonight what we really want to do with you is really dialogue a little bit about our history, about what's going on. We have a very diverse panel here that are experts on their own history, and they know the things of their lives and things that they have experienced. And we're hoping that through this whole dialogue that we would be able to share with you different aspects, and realizing that time is of essence and that we're just sort of touching a little bit of things as we go. But we will, at the end, try to have a question and answer period. And so if there's anything that you would like to ask, we'll do our very best to ask that. I think when we look at the African American community, there are two institutions that have survived over the years through all that has gone on. And that is the family and the church. And we're going to begin our discussion by maybe talking about our families and allowing the panel to begin to tell some interesting historical facts about their family and some of their earliest recognitions of things that they have seen. And we want to start with my aunt. This is not my mother. This is my aunt. Okay.
Well, I'd just like to share a few things with you. First of all, my parents are from Virginia. They came here in 1926. And later we moved to a farm, which was on North Main Street, the Newberry Farm. Maybe some of you knew about that. But we were there, and we had a great time there on the farm. We were all a large family, a family of 8 children and 2 adults. But we were happy, and we lived happily together. And that's a bit more than I can say for a lot of families today. Well, being on the farm, we had a few cows and a few hogs and chickens and maybe a few other things that we raised. Well, these things served a dual purpose. Well, during the winter time, we had the hogs, and they were killed, and I try to get as far away from them as I possibly could because I didn't like that time of the year. But I love the pork chops that came. However, we raised our own vegetable garden, and we had vegetables, fresh vegetables, throughout the vegetable season. And my mom canned a lot of things, which we put away for the winter months. And this was a great time with us going into the garden, using our own hands to cultivate, to weed, and what have you, and to say, this is what the products that I have, that I helped work with. So therefore, those things meant much to us. We didn't have very much. We had, in fact, little, but what we had, we shared, and we spread it out among the family, which was good. And everyone looked out for one another. And therefore, we realized that from doing this, there's much that we have to appreciate today, because we have so much today. And when we look back on those days, we can say, well, thank God I have what I have today, but thank God from whence I come. So therefore, we are a very proud people. My parents always told us to be loving, to be kind to everyone, no matter who. So we tried hard to do that. And I think from that, I've made it up until today. And I don't think I've did too badly. However, that's the way it was. So that's a little bit of background on my family background. So I would like to have someone else to take over right now.
Okay, I'm Barbara Turpin. I was born on North Sea Road on the hill that was once security. And I was out of 5 children. I was the only one born at home. My mom and dad came here from Virginia in 32, I think, and 33. I was born in 35. We went to the Diamond Farm on Flying Point Road when I was 7 years old. And I must say, it was a very, very, very happy life because there was so much security in farm life. And you were sent to school, but you were eager to get back home to your warm kitchen. And like Roxanne, I was raised much the very same way. Moralistically, church was extremely important. My father had a large garden. My greatest memory is the Victory Garden during World War II, and the flowers, and the beauty, and the land. And I was married from that farm at 16 years old, a young man from Riverhead, and we have 5 children. And none of our children are here. They're away. But like I said, we were there on the farm until 1963. And 4 of my children were even born there. But it was a very, very rich life. And I'm sorry that my children couldn't have had more time down there, but they did. 3 of them really knew about the farm life. Very happy.
My name is Noah Summers. I was born in North Carolina, Carrollton, North Carolina. And my mother died when I was 4 years old. My grandfather raised me. And when I came about 17 years old, I came to Southampton on a farm. I worked on a farm for several years. And I worked for a cook at East Hampton. And I cooked in East Hampton for 3 years. And my boss that I was working for, he sold a place in a motel in New York City. And I left New York City with him. In New York City, while cooking in New York City, I met my wife, Pearl Bailey, and we married in 1992. And we moved back to Southampton in 1993. And the 5 girls we had, and 4 of them graduated from Southampton High School, 2 with the Gold Honor. And after that, I went to work with Roscoe Farm. And at Roscoe Farm, I run the potato house for them. And after I run the potato house for them, I started going to business for myself. And I went in business packing. For F.A.'s Boston, one of the biggest companies in the world. And I had 4 warehouses on the island, 2 in Bridgehampton, and 1 in Orange Point, and 1 in Manitoba. And I run them for about 4 years. And then the company moved me to Jersey. I had New Jersey troop, so forth. And after then, I went in business for myself, a landscaping. And after being in business for landscaping, I expanded. I bought a bar and restaurant in East Hampton, Spring Road, main road was College Inn. After a few years, I let go of that. And I continued my landscaping. And I bought a renting resort in North B Street, where it was a motel, growing house, and college. I kept it for about 3 or 4 years, and I did that. I maintained my business of landscaping in Southampton. I increased my business in Southampton landscaping, which I bought bulldozer, tractors, and dump trucks, and I went for myself at home. And I had about 20 people working for me at the time, and I was putting in driveways, parking lots, and cutting lawns, planting trees, and so forth. And my children grew up in Southampton High School and graduated, and after then, they all got married, and they left town. I have 1 girl. She's sitting there. And the rest of them was in Florida, California, Virginia, and Maryland. And I'm still here. My wife is there, Pearl Summers. She's in the nursing home now. She's taking 6 in Southampton nursing home, but I'm still maintaining her home instead. And I love Southampton because Southampton's been a part of me, and I've been part of Southampton.
Everybody's laughing. Last but not least, I must say that Southampton has been my home all my life. My grandfather and grandmother came to Southampton in 1862. The area just to the other side of the Shinnecock Reservation, where Bailey Road is, that property belonged to my grandfather. He had 9 children. Some of them lived in Southampton, some of them lived in South Holden. My dad came from Maryland, Dawsonville. As a child, he was born in 1858. He ran away from home and went into West Virginia and went to coal mines and worked. From there, he went to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and worked in the steel mill. Now, how he came to Southampton, why he did, I don't know. That I couldn't answer. My mother was born here in Southampton in 1885. She went to school in Southampton. Here, she did. She went to school with people like Jack Herrick and so on and so forth. She went to school with them. My dad, the property where I live right now on Halsey Avenue, bought that property in 1919. That's how long I've been living on Halsey Avenue. I knew when the majority of these people came in here from the south. The area that I live the street I live on, when I was a child, we used to call it Guinea Street because the Italian people lived there, the Polish people lived there. There were very few of us living in that area, but now it's altogether different. As a matter of fact, the majority of people who live in that area, Willie Street, Halsey Avenue, Dale White Lane, they're all new. Now, I was looking tonight, one lady came in here, whose family used to live right behind us. That's Mrs. Hurley. I don't know where she is. She's in here somewhere, but I saw her. Her husband and her husband's family was right across the fence from us. And they used to have a cow and a lot of chickens and dogs and geese. And we had a good time. We were all, like the Hurleys, the Fannings, the Crooks, the whole gang of us. We were all friends together. We were all in one area. Now, as far as my family, there were 5 of us. 4 boys and 1 girl. The girl was a baby. My oldest brother lives in Belfort. He's 81 years old. I'm the middleman, and my sister lives up in the Bronx. She's an evangelist. My oldest brother is a Seventh-day Adventist minister. My 2 other brothers, they're both deceased. So that's 5 of us. Now, as far as school is concerned, I started Southampton High School. I was born November 3rd, 1918, just 8 days before the arms were signed in World War I. I was too young to go into school, because school, you had to be at least 5 years old to go to school in September. By me coming in November, I had to wait a whole year to get into school. But I was lucky. When I went to school, my mother had taught. She always used to teach you how to write your name. Used to write it, scratch it down. How to count from 1 to 25. When I went to school, I went right in 1st grade. I went from 1st grade to 4th grade. I got to 4th grade. They skipped me from 4th to 6th. That's what happened. And I graduated from Southampton High School at 16 years of age. I took a commercial course in high school. Bookkeeping, shorthand, typing, commercial law, arithmetic, all of that. And with the marking period we used to have, someone in your class, they'd put you down. Whatever your average was, they'd give you the rank in class. And every one of those classes that I was in, if I didn't have that number 1, I was sick. That's what I used to strive for. When I graduated from high school, my younger sister and brother were still in school. I had a scholarship to Hampton Institute, and I would not go because my dad was aged and my mother, she used to take in laundry. And I went to work. I went to work in Bellows Nursery. I worked there from 1935 until 1942 when I went in the Army. I was a field foreman from Bellows Brothers. 1942, I went to service.
Let's go back to school for a moment, okay? very interesting that you all were part of Southampton school system in the very early years. Could you please recall and share with us some of the moments or some of the perspectives that you had or experiences that went on in school at that time?
Well, with me, there was nothing extraordinary that I knew about. I mean, we went to school, we were all one thing. I have a picture at home. I was in the 7th grade. I was the only black in the class. That's how it was. The majority of people that came from the South and came to school here in Southampton, they did not have the exact education or that we had. I mean, we were always a little farther advanced than they were. And
was that because of you mentioned something about a tracking or about an academic course or something? Could you explain that?
Well, that was because their curriculum education was not like the one. In other words, they all went to black schools.
Yeah, but I wanted to know the curriculum here in Southampton. Very interesting because as a graduate, I graduated in the greatest year in Southampton in 1970. It was the greatest year in Southampton. And one of the very interesting things was, blacks have always attended to achieve education. And there was a tracking system. You had non-regions and regions and different things. But it seems like somewhere down the line we had been talking about the value of schools and some moments and some things that we had. And that even then, that there was a couple courses, a couple of different ways that one could achieve the goals that they really wanted to have. And to make a very good point in that, as we discuss it, is that we, coming from the South, there was segregated schools, but here we did not experience that at that time. And so I think that's very rich in itself, and just, your own experiences. And we have 2 other graduates here, Southampton schools, and was there any memories that you have, anything you want to share?
Well, as I was going to school, it seemed as though everybody was, real nice, and we got along well together. However, you can always detect a few things when you have to. But on a whole, as I say, everyone was very nice to me, and I tried to be very kind and do what I had to do. However, as I said, my mother always told me to stand up for the right, and when I know I was right, always take a stand. And back to the regions and what have you, I feel that back there in the 40s, we were not really highly encouraged to go on to higher heights in education as the children may be now or back even when Harry Martin was going to school. I somehow majored in home economics, which was most likely domestic or going out to in a restaurant business or what have you. But I was never really encouraged from the school as guidance. Push on and do something a little bit more than that. I was satisfied. My parents probably didn't recognize or know too much about things in those days. So, therefore, I just went on and majored in the home economics field, which I pushed my children to do a great deal more than that. I encouraged them to be in regions whenever they could. I encouraged them to do the best they could, and I was out there to PTO meetings that they had. I was there, and I was there to back them up. And they somehow know this, and they somehow thank me today for pushing them. And the 3 of them graduated here in Southampton. They went on, my oldest daughter now, a teacher of a religious school in Orlando, Florida. My youngest daughter, supervised in dietetics, she's a dietitian, in Chesapeake, Virginia. And my son, he just does work, office work in Atlanta, Georgia. But they're all doing fine. And I'm glad I was here to give them a little extra boost in more Southern life.
I'd like to, add that we were geared more to home economics, Black Americans. The boys to shop. And that's because we really didn't have the same kind of guidance that they've had in the school system since my children went to school. So therefore, as Roxanne has already stated, they knew to go higher ground. We were sort of satisfied, but yet, as we grew older and we could see the difference, our children wanted an education, so that's what they really thrived for, and that's what they got. But, there wasn't anything we could say. I couldn't say, well, we didn't do this or we didn't do that, because I did have opportunity. Even after getting married, my husband was overseas. I couldn't go back to school. I was offered to go to college. I did not graduate. I got married. I'm still happy. but like I said, I was a home economics student, and most black guys were shocked. And thank God they did learn to do different.
I think it's very interesting that we historically have been part of our school system and have participated. And I want to shift our focus a little bit as I think about my own growing up here in Southampton, that there seems to always been some kind of black business. Blacks have been very much involved in the economic development of the community. And I thought maybe we could have a little discussion about some of the businesses and some of the things that we sort of remember or that was here in the early ages of development of Southampton.
Well, I can remember in the 30s on the corner of Horse Avenue with a barber shop run by Sylvester Seymour and Emmanuel Seymour. They was first cousin. And after that, the building come a store, which was owned by Mr. Butler, Alfred Butler, and Mrs. Butler. And they stayed there for some times. And down by Oxford Avenue, it was a store that was run by Mr. Ebert Dozie. It was a store and a restaurant. And the barber shop there run by Heavy, we call him Heavy, Rodale Furby. And he run the barber shop there, that was some time ago. And up until about 7 years ago, the building was still operating there when Mrs. Dozie, she died. And the building was still there, it's business, barber shop, and the beauty parlor. And on the other end, the house was torn down, and another house was moved there, and Mrs. Ward lived there now. So that was the business in those latter years on Saturday.
Mr. Martin, was there some farms, some business back there in those early years when your grandfather and all of them was up to date? Sort of operate these farms themselves? Or
my grandfather, he operated on his own farm. Up there on Bailey Road, he also used to rent land from the Shinnecock Reservation. I know he used to do that. After he stopped farming, and his children disappeared. They went to different places. Some went to Jersey, some went, all around. I know a lot of my aunts and uncles moved over to Jersey. But that was the end of his farming. Now, the land that he owned up there, he used to rent that out to different people around town. I know Percy Kingberg used to rent some of that land up there. And some of it was sold. Some of his daughters, sons, they sold that property and left Southampton. A lot of it did. They left Southampton. It's the same deal. Now, we were talking about education going to school. Now, with me, they offered in high school, Southampton High School, they offered two types of courses. You could take a commercial course, or you could take an academic course. Now, the academic course, I don't even I don't even know where they offer that anymore because my oldest brother, he took French, he took Latin, he took German, all of those things. Now, me, coming back, I took a strict commercial course. That's what I took. I mean, that was what I wanted. That's what I took, and I was thinking about going to school for business administration. That was what I wanted. All through high school, the only thing up and above extracurricular stuff, I didn't play in the high school band. I did that. But other than that, that was it. I ran on the track team for about a year, but I got to the place where I didn't care about that. After I got out of high school, then my thoughts went different. I did. After, well, I was going to say after. When I went in service, there were 200 of us left here, 1942, 701. We went to Camp Upton, which is now Brookhaven Lab. That was Camp Upton. That is where they were separated. We were separated. And 100 of us went down to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. As a matter of fact, my oldest brother and I were right in that group, but he used to sleep bed to bed with me in basic training. He, Tommy Marshall, Harding, Don Lewis, all those fellows, we all went down there together. My mother had 3 sons in the Army in 4 days. And just figured. At the end of, before our basic training was over, my oldest brother and I were transferred from a gun graduate to a specialist battalion. He went into the motor section, and they put me in the clerk section.
That was all with that training that
Within
come
1
from
week,
school.
in 4 days.
I recall also back in those days we had right at the end of my street, Hillcrest Avenue, we had a little like a cafe, and that was just like a place where all the youngsters could go. We didn't have money to go to the movie, so we
Y'all
kind
didn't
of
let us go
gathered.
there when we were growing up. It was Robinson's Bar, and we wanted to go. You wouldn't let us go.
Art and Susie Robinson, called Susie's Sweet Shop. And I recall working there as a teenager, a short while there. I had behind the ice cream counter, and that was very good for me, but it wasn't good for, the parents. But it was very nice. The youngsters would gather there, and we'd have piccolo and what have you, and they'd eat ice cream and have the soda and what have you. And they really enjoyed that. It was one of our main little meeting grounds. However, we'll never forget the church, because the church was our basic, and that's where we got our roots, is from the church. I guess that's why I'm still there today.
Before we deal with that, I just want to, when you talk about social, you talk about coming together and doing that, I remember you used to play a lot of softball, and that there was a lot of activities of sports and things. Could we just hear something historical about some of that?
Well, I played softball in Southampton, I think, about 18 years. And I played with the all-black team, and I played with the all-white team. And we played ball, and we had fun. We played the Canetta Club, and we played different places. We used our buses and our cars. And we won track every time we were at Southampton. We always brought the game back to Southampton. And I enjoyed it. And we went together, and we played together. Nothing wrong with that. We had a good time. We got us a good time. Because we went to play ball. And we played ball. And I played playing ball after. I played ball until I was 51 years old. And I could outrun some of the boys at 16. And I loved the game. And then after I played ball, I started playing ball with the Little League. And I went to the Little League for about 7 years. Mr. Campbell, County, and so forth and so on. And so I realized last year that I had come and help them. But when you get 25, your nerves are not too good. So you can't be on the kids no more. So it's so I didn't get sent to go and help them. But I'm with them all the time. They need me for something like that. But I enjoy playing ball. I enjoy the Little League. Because it should be now, I think. It should be more young boys in the league like letting them playing ball that we used to play years ago, I think would be more helpful for the young kids, the teenagers. Give them something to do, because around the corner and here, with a little cigarette in the mouth, and that's not doing them any good. That's only killing them, you see. But it seems like the young people do not want to do anything today but smoke.
Okay.
Well, I was going to say, I went back a little bit to businesses. My father did not have a formal business. But have you ever heard of Pickle Patch? Mm-hmm. My father had maybe about 4 or 5 cucumber fields. And he did sell the cucumbers. And once in a while, I was put to work in Cucumber Patch. And I never worked there. Because I really liked being in the house. And I did, you know, I liked to cook. I was just a behind-the-scenes person. And I hated outdoor work. So I escaped. And my father had a pickle patch, maybe until just 10 years ago. And he was still selling pickles and other vegetables.
In 1916, the Bethel Church was established, and it wasn't soon, I think it was right after that, one of the first other black churches here in Southampton was the First Baptist Church of Southampton, and then it was Community Baptist, and I think then later King's Chapel Church of God in Christ was formed. And as you've heard us state so many times, that church has been so much an integral part of our lives, and it's had this value. The church was that place where we met. The church was the place where we received our spiritual guidance, as well as we were able to socialize and to be with one another, and families were able to come and to sing. And one of the things is that if we had no other position in the community, in the church, we could be deacons and trustees, and we could be someone. And church has always been very important in our lives. And I think we should, as we begin to close up, we should at least spend the next few moments maybe talking about the effect of church and the value of the church, and just, you know, our own experiences and how long we have been involved with the church.
Well, I tell you, when you speak about Bethel Church, my dad and mother, they were founded in Bethel. My aunts and uncle, that's where we all started out. I remember it started out Sunday morning, at 9:15, you started for church. You better be there. Sunday school at 9:30. My uncle used to ring that bell down at Bethel Church. He'd walk in, he'd pull on that cord, you know, ringing the bell. The first thing that my mother and dad would ask him, did they get here on time? Yeah, that's one thing. Then, in the summer, they had vacation Bible school. Now somewhere, you got some pictures of that, vacation Bible school. And I was looking at those pictures, and I was picking out the majority of the children that went to those vacation Bible schools are no longer living. I'll tell you. I have lots of cousins, and I said, now, you know, here we are. And I wonder sometimes, why am I here? I mean, you know, when the people that you grew up with, the people that you're around with, and all of a sudden they're all gone, and you're here. You say, wonder why I'm here. Now, First Baptist Church, that started 1932. And 1939, the property on Halsey Avenue, the Reverend W.H. Green and I went to New York City and purchased that property from the Homeowners Loan Corporation. I was one of the trustees, and I was the financial secretary of the church. As a matter of fact, I did that for 17 years. We bought that property, and on Halloween night, it caught on fire at 1939. So they cleaned it up.
Only thing saved, Brother Watt, was the Bible. The only thing saved was the Bible.
The Bible, too. 1941, they built an edifice right there on Halsey Avenue. And I remember the war had started, and we put blackout shades on the windows so we could have night service. We have service morning and at night. Now they don't do that anymore. I went to service in 42. That was the end of...
Let me interject to say that, you know, you hear us say a lot of things starting on Halsey Avenue. And when you really look at it, Halsey Avenue was one of the first black communities that was established here in Southampton. I mean, there was others blacks that lived across from Bethel Church, and there was other. But when you really begin to think about a black community, it was the Halsey Avenue area that became one of the first black communities. And then the other black community that began to develop was what is we call the Hill, and it's involved with Hillcrest. And I can even remember myself as there were, Miller Road was a dirt road, and there was only one house up at the top, and how all of that done. And I had parties in all of the houses that was built on Hillcrest. So when we talk about the communities and refer to the avenue, which was Halsey Avenue, and the Hill, which is considered the Hillcrest area now, which encompasses Miller Road and Windward Way. What other experiences have we had with church?
I had the experience of having Mr. Martin as my Sunday school teacher. And he and Mrs. Madge Griffin used to tuck me under their arm. And my brother, my oldest brother, who was Harrison Johnson, who's now deceased, they would, one was on someone's arm, take us over snowbanks to get to church. And we walked from North Sea Road to Halsey Avenue to the church. And, it was, our morals were really, that was the place to be, even as a little child. Singing recitations, can't wait to be old enough to sing on a choir. And it was just the meeting ground for joy, happy times.
Yes, we really did have fun.
Yes.
And, that's where we met, as I say, even to meet our friends, the boys, girls, and vice versa. We, if you couldn't come to church, you come to church, you can't see my daughter. One of those things. And as Penny spoke about, the number of years I've been in Sunday school, and my Sunday school scholars look at me sometimes, and I look at them and says, "Where were you last Sunday?" And they says, "Oh, I was tired." I says, "What do you think about me? I've been here before your age. I've been here. I'm still here. I'm still coming every Sunday. So why can't you?" But it's something to think about when you think that in managing children. Now, in those days, my youngest daughter and Marvin's youngest brother, when I had those children, which are 30, 31 now,
Don't tell my age.
I had about 20 students in my class, junior class, and I could manage those children. Of course, I'm much older now, but it seems as though now I have 4 or 5, and I can't get along and manage those like I could 20 children then. So you see that as time goes by, it has things have changed, and the children have a different attitude toward a lot of things. But we try hard to work with them, do that we do have, and to instill in them the same principles that God is love. And I find if we all do that, we know that we will have a better world.
My history in the church is where it comes from. And where it is from Lord, because I was in First Baptist Church for 41 years. And chairman of the trustee board once, and I was president of the men's brotherhood. And we had a lot of time there. And his mother, Mrs. Martin, was my mother too. Of course, long then, all those elder mothers was mother to everybody's sons and daughters.
That's right.
And when they said something, we moved. And it's not like now, you say something to one of the youngsters now, they go home and tell their mother, and the mother leaves the child. But long then, you would not say Mrs. So-and-so told a lie on people's mother, then you'd be in trouble. See? And I like that. And the preachers was different, too.
All right, let's leave the preachers. Let me say this. As moderator, I have the right to do this.
And as a preacher, there
was a concept that you did speak of that I didn't want to lose. And that was we often say that it takes an entire African village to raise one child. And I think that's something that's very rich here when we're talking about our church and we're talking about family, is that we were all part of one family and that we worked together, and that there was many times that if I was out of line, which was only a few times, that someone down the road who was not an uncle or who was not a relative would chastise and would make sure that this would happen. And so there was a tremendous sense of value of family and the sharing and the raising and getting along within the community. And I didn't want to lose that point, because I think that when we historically look at where we've come from and what's happening, and we look at our community, we must look at that some of the roots really began with us caring for one another and being concerned about each other. And I think those are some very valuable moments. And as we continue, I think we're getting slow. Okay, Mr. Martin, I saw your forehead riled up. To me, as a former teacher, I know that means you got something to say. Yeah.
No, what I was going to say, when Cindy spoke about the ministry, when I was growing up, as far as I was concerned, a minister, a deacon, they were some people. Now, I didn't, if I was in church and I kind of sniggled when the deacon looked at me, that's all I needed. And a minister, well, he was up there.
You know why that was? You know why that was? Because historically, you go back to the plantation and back within our history, the black minister was always free to move about and to speak the truth. And so within him developed the leadership and developed the respect, and he didn't depend on anyone else but the congregation to take care of him. And so therefore he would freely speak to the ills and speak to the moral corruptions and to the things that was in the community. And so because there was a sense of always wanting to do what's right, I think it's sad now that we have so much on television that wants to show black family, black community in a disarray and dysfunctional. But I think one of the things that you really have heard is that we are here because there was a real family and there was a firm belief in a God, and we're never ashamed to go back to our spiritual roots and to say the church was that forum where we learned to speak, where we were able to be creative and to celebrate our being. It was a place where it reinforced that if society said that we were nothing, church says that we were something. And it became that motivating tool that we have. And when we really talk about our roots and where we are and where we have to go back and we start with the church. We historically have to also look at the role that the church has played, because in history itself, it was the black church who began to formulate the schools, the colleges that we went to. And the history of our country is not as sweet as sometimes we want to make it. There was segregation, and blacks were not allowed to go to school. And it was our church who deeply believed in the root that God had created us all to be equal. And it was our church who began. It was our missionary societies that began to look after people and to care and to begin to develop the medical things that was needed. It was our church who developed the social atmosphere so that we could do. There was nothing in the black community like a cotillion. It was one of those great things where we come together and we would do these things. So it was, the church was the very foundation of all of our lives. It was a very central point. And coming from the South, for some reason in the South they go to church. I don't know what's happened up north. Maybe we've got caught up with the capitalistic system and we've got a different way. But in the South, they went to church. And I went to church here growing up. If I stayed out on Saturday night till 3 o'clock, I had to go to church on Sunday morning. There was no question about it. It wasn't a choice. I had to go, and I'm glad it wasn't a choice. But the church played a very vital role in the development of us. And when we really look back, it's those things that we learned in church, those things that we shared in church, that was able to sustain us and to really help us to be who we were. And when you begin to talk about Bethel Church and think about the records they kept and who was part of it and who started it, that really begins to formulate the whole history, who we were and what we really have been about. You know, have I overlooked anything as we begin to? Yes, Bob.
I'd just like to reiterate on our church life as kids with a man named Deacon Raymond Saunders. And it was something that we did every 4th of July that went on for many, many years. We had this huge church picnic with all kinds of food. And it's something that we look forward to, not just to children, but parents. And it was a Sunday school affair. And we went to the beach, and we went on an old raggedy truck, as many of us that could get on there at that time, in the 40s and 50s. I believe it carried over until you? Yes, of course, I think so. So I remember my children going on a few. But it couldn't have been like ours. Because it just couldn't have been like the 40s and the 50s. And, you know, the beach life and everything very clean and very sterile, and the potato salad and the fried chicken and the watermelon and the homemade ice cream. So that's just a fond memory that really brought us together. Cold Springs.
As we look at our history, we look at the contributions and what we have offered to the Southampton community, and the very fact that when you go back as far as Mr. Martin with his family that was born here and here, and then those of us that have come and we have been able to become an integral part of the community and to share in the whole being and the shaping of the community, we realize that we have a very rich and a very diverse history, a history that one should be very proud of, and one that we should talk about so much and share. And that's one of the things that makes us so happy with so many of you that have come out this evening to hear the tip of the iceberg and to begin to share with that. And before I really close, we want to just take a few moments. If there are any questions that anyone would like to ask, yes.
I was just curious about the numbers of families. You were talking, say, in the 40s and the 50s. Was there one church at that time, or more than that? And about how many families were there within, as compared to now?
Now, if I'm chronologically right, in Bethel Church started, it was like 16 years after Bethel Church started, First Baptist Church was formed.
That was when?
Okay.
About
1932.
Okay.
It was in 1932. And, okay.
In the 30s and 40s, about how many families, in the period you were describing growing up, with this closeness, I'm just curious about the numbers of people we're talking about.
Somewhere I read 150 people. I don't know.
Mr. Martin, do you?
50 people.
People, not families.
But families,
Small. Small. We're talking about
that's in the very
small,
beginning,
yeah.
around Bethel time. Yeah.
1960 to
Right. I don't know if anyone has a count of families. You?
No, I don't know.
Today,
No.
we have no idea. Do we know?
Today?
Yeah.
I would say, in the sense of people you're talking about in the village of Southampton. Of course, let me go back. Those census that I gave you in the very beginning just didn't deal with the geographical bounds of Southampton. They also expanded to Sag Harbor, and there was parts of the other western end of the town that it also included. we'd say now that within the village you're probably dealing with African American population of about 1,100 people. You have a tremendous population here now.
And in the township, does anyone know?
In the township there is about 24,000 people, and I believe we would probably be a good 8 to 9% of that.
I have a question I'd like to ask Mr. Martin. I find it interesting going through Southampton School myself. You said that when you were going to school, you seemed like you were more educated, they educate you more, you think, than... Another question before you answer that, how many African American or blacks were in high school or in school when you were in school?
Well, I couldn't count how many were there, but I do know when I graduated high school, we had 54 people in there, and there were, I don't know, maybe 8 of us in that graduating class, some from the reservation. Let's see, I know it was Branch College, Charlie Ashman, Earl Hunter, myself, Marion Dawson. I think there were about 8 of us in the class of 35. And after that, I mean, and I had a sister and a brother. They came, I think, 1939, 1940. Then it began to branch out.
Okay, got more.
More and more. Because a lot of the children, when they got to be about 16 years of age, they didn't want to go to school anymore. They wanted to go to work. I want to go to work. That established a big thing. And nobody said, stay in school. I mean, nobody said, stay in school and get what you can. But I knew myself, that when I got finished with school, I had a younger sister and a brother, and I wanted them to have the same chance that I did. My two older brothers, they took off. They left home, they left Southampton. So I was the middleman, and I was going to stay. And
I guess the point I'm trying to make is you're saying that more blacks came into the school system maybe after you. And so talking to you and then listening to Mrs. Turpin and Mrs. Dozier, seemed like the school system changed when more blacks came in. That seems to be what I'm picking up.
And that would also be indicative of the times.
Yeah.
Going from the roaring 20s and coming into the 30s and 40s, and different things really begin to happen. And so, yes, it's a very interesting study. Okay.
There was an onslaught of people from the South and bought the school system. New people.
Okay, and to also probably say that we have a question over here. To also to say that most of the blacks when they used to come up were migrants in the sense of coming and leaving and going back, and then they begin to see the sandy shores of Gin Lane and the beach down there, and everybody began to stay.
Yes.
And that's how it all began to develop.
You almost stole my question. I wanted to ask Ms. Dozier, Ms. Turpin, your family came up from Virginia, Mr. Simmons, your family from North Carolina. Why Southampton?
Yeah.
Why? There's a million places. Why Southampton?
I don't know.
Mr. Martin, you said you didn't know the answer. Why Southampton?
Other relatives come and they invite
I'm just
you
trying
to
to
come.
why people pick from, especially from Virginia. Why?
Okay, one of the things. Well, let me say this. My family come from there too. You let me out. One of the things that happens is that in the South they were working on farms, and they were very much involved with agriculture. And around that time, if you go back and look in the 30s and 40s, farming began to become a very popular thing here on the East End. Prior to that, you dealt with whaling and you dealt with Sag Harbor, where Southampton was never really a port, but you dealt with the whaling and the boats and stuff in Sag Harbor. And there was also another place down, Conscious Point down in North Sea. But around that time, you begin to deal with the farming. And I think it was probably word of mouth. Someone comes up And then they say, well, I need 2 or 3. Well, I know 4 strong young men. They would leave their families in the South, and they would come here and work, and they would go back and work on the farms that they had there. And then after a while, it began to develop into a very permanent community and uniting with the community that was already here. So it was the farm. It was the potato that really brought it up. Okay?
And that's why you find a lot of family, you know, right. My cousin will tell the other cousin, and nephew will tell another nephew, let's go to Long Island.
We're here, and we have one over here.
Now, Mr. Dozier, what it might be, and I'm not sure about this, but that time you're talking about, people are switching, the local people are switching from horses to tractors. And when they do that, previously with the horses, they just would farm what their family could manage. Once you do the tractor, you can do vast acreage, but at harvest time, then you need a lot of people. And I think it's a switch from horses to tractors meant at harvest time, you couldn't rely on the family because you had expanded. So I think that's when the migrant may have started. It really, the farming was always here, and they were doing potatoes at turn of the century also. I think it's more the switch from horses to tractors and larger farms.
But somebody mentioned something, Piccadilly, or I'm not quite sure what it was. I wonder what that was. Pickle patch. But there was another word that somebody used. Piccolo. And I wonder what that is. And also, I see all these things behind you, and I wonder if any of these things behind you.
Piccolo is the same thing as a jukebox.
Oh, really?
Same thing.
And these things that are behind you, do they have any part in your
You put a
lives?
penny in it.
Could you talk about that?
I don't know.
Let's just take a moment and explain.
All right. The butter churn, which is here. I used this as a youngster. The mother would let the milk sour, would put it in here, churn it, and re-churn. Till the butter comes. Butter would float on top, you take the butter out. Then what you have left would be buttermilk, which I never liked buttermilk. And I really didn't care much for the butter, but that's all we had. So we had the washboard. We used a washboard. We had no washing machine when I was real young.
But no washing machines?
No. We scrubbed it on. We scrubbed on what? And when I was coming, we had the 10 washboard. We scrub the clothes on that washboard. We come home from school, we take the scrub and rub those clothes. Maybe 3 times a week we'd take, a family like mine, at least 3 times a week we'd wash. And then we'd iron this heavy thing. Put it on a wooden coal stove and get it real hot. You'd have to take 3 or 4 potholes to hold it. And you get it nice and clean, and you keep it nice and shiny so that it wouldn't scorch the clothes or what have you. But thank God for the steam iron. Because this was this heavy. I think that's why arthritis settled in my shoulder.
That's sticky with homemade starch. You use a wax method to add a wax.
And this is a lemon squeezer, which I borrowed from someone. As you see, it has a little, and you put the lemon in, and you squeeze it in, and it comes out through the little holes there.
Because you made the best lemonade.
Yes. I never used the bellows because we never really had a fireplace, but I just borrowed this. And there's a few other things. There's corn planter, but maybe we don't have too much time there, that my dad used to plant corn in the garden. This is a... He practiced. I've used this many times for sausage. I made sausage, and my mother would spice it up. I said, Mom, don't put too much pepper in. I hate pepper. And she'd make half mild and half hot. And then you had to put your tongue on the clothesline with a pen. This is what I use a lot, too.
I have a little one like that that's called masticator, which my mother-in-law used to grind the baby food.
Really?
It's a little finer than
Because we're running short on time, so you can look at those later.
Another question.
healing or cures in your culture? Like, you remember from
Mustard bath or mustard plaster. I remember having bronchitis. And I can remember having a high temperature at 4 years old. And I can remember my mother, it's so vivid, putting me in a tub of water with mustard. And then when we got a very bad cold, they would put mustard oil on a cloth, and it had to be a certain kind of flannel.
Yes.
Terrible.
Yes.
It's a job. It really does.
Castor oil.
Oranges.
Mr. Martin was interrupted. Actually, went into World War II. You were a clerk.
Started out as a clerk.
And then what happened? I guess what I'm asking, can you bring us quickly from World War II to
You can't do that quickly.
I started out. I went into a clerk section. I was there 4 days. They called me into the audit room. The clerk was going on furlough. You go in the audit room, take charge of records until he comes back. When he came back after 2 weeks, they told me that they're going to send him to another outfit. They gave him the job as a company clerk. I became a call for him. I stayed there for 13 months in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. We deactivated the 5th Regiment. I moved out to Fort Worth, California. Activated the Horn Examination Company. I was a buck sergeant then. I came home on furlough, went back. Company commander said, go to the supply room. You need a supply sergeant. He made me a staff sergeant. I took that group overseas. I set them up, outfitted them all. We went out under the Golden Gate Bridge in 44. They said Golden Gate in 48. On the way out, I made tech sergeant. We went to Oral Bay, New Guinea. 13 months I stayed there. Went over the USS Lorelei, the flagship to Manson line. 26 days unescorted. 10,000 GIs, 5,000 wax. We put 200 Red Cross workers. Put the wax off in Brisbane, Australia. 3 days, I went to Oral Bay, New Guinea. I stayed there 13 months. From Oral Bay, New Guinea, we went to the island of Biak. From the island of Biak, we went to the island of Panay. We were training for the invasion of Japan, which was supposed to have been November 1st, 1945. We were staging out there. That's what we were doing. In the meantime, they dropped the atomic bomb. So, we went to Manila. 77-ship convoy LSTs we started for Yokohama. 31 days, 77-ship convoy LSTs. We get into Yokohama, too many ships, we sail all the way around Japan, from down through the Sea of Japan to Nagata, where the New York 27.
Okay, I'm going to do this. You meet with him. Finish. You want to deal with the history. Okay? All right. Yes, we have another question.
I have a question about the church for anyone who wants to answer it. What was the role of the women in the church? We talk about the ministry, the deacons and the ministers. What did the women do in the church?
Oh, most likely the women were missionaries. And most women, as someone spoke about, was just like a mother. The elderly women were like the mothers. And they kind of, took the children under their wings and taught them the morals and what have you.
There never was a second-class citizenship with Afro-American women in the church. In the church, women were just as important and done just as much work as the men did. Yeah. There are some women that are deacons. That's a practice that's practiced with different churches and various churches. But they are. What we had, maybe sometimes the equivalent was deaconess. So you had a deacon and a deaconess, and they were in charge of the moral bringing and the biblical mandate to train the young and to inspire and to be involved with the young. But women was always elevated in this position. That's one of the things that the church did very well. Like I was just part of a group and we were talking, and the African American church has always sort of held women in very high regard. Okay. Are there any? Yes.
There's just one question I want to add. That you mentioned Pyrus Concert. He's buried not far from here in the North End Cemetery. And if anybody should get a chance, is to go look at his grave and his stone. It's a black granite stone next to the loading dock. And it basically says that he was born a slave, but he had freedoms that kings never had. And then also, if you get a chance to go back to the old Southampton presses, he died in 1897, read his obituary. It's quite an interesting, this man was quite an interesting person.
Where is
The grave is located at North End Cemetery next to the A&P. His gravesite is, it's right over here. It's a black granite stone near the loading dock. And he's buried there, his wife and his son.
Loading dock of the A&P.
Yeah. And if you get a chance, there was a little booklet published by Arthur Davis, who was a postman in town, and he wrote quite a bit about him. That's where I picked up most of my knowledge.
Just one last question. What was it like here in the 60s? Pretty turbulent era in terms of race and Vietnam War. What was it like here then?
Right on.
Like everywhere else.
Exciting movement.
Yes, I think the 60s, as they did anywhere else in the country, marked a significant change in awareness and a consciousness that began to develop throughout the country. There was the whole movement of I'm black and I'm proud, and there was the identity of the Afros and the Dashikis and Marcus Garvey and Malcolm X and Reverend Martin Luther King, and there was a great movement. I think here in Southampton, it affected us a great deal. I can remember we didn't have riots, but I can remember marching out of the school and frightened to death that my dad was going to beat me to death when I got home. But we didn't have black teachers, and we had no black studies department. And it was in the 60s that we began to hire black teachers, and we began to incorporate more of black history within the curriculum. And so I think that the 60s responded to that. I think there was a tremendous awareness of the various communities and where we lived and jobs and employment, and I think all of those things that went on throughout the country also existed here.
I can tell you another thing in the 60s. I worked out on the ocean front for the Galucci's. I was the state superintendent there for 15 years. I also was a manager of Southampton Stationery. 18 years I managed Southampton Stationery. Under Jack Sandberg and under Irving Constable. Those are the two jobs that I had. I did those two things.
Okay.
I can't remember the date, but I would think it's like 1964, 65. There was a march in Southampton. There was a black group that had formed initially with all the churches involved, and then when the group got a little too uppity, some people left it, and then there was a march through town. And I mean, I thought there was such reaction in this town. They had all the firemen came out, and they were patrolling the streets like they thought it was going to burn the town down or something. And it was a part of it was two things together. It was the anti-war thing that was starting up in the nation, but there was also the civil rights movement. And it was okay, I felt, that you could be involved with civil rights if you did it at the speed at which Southampton wanted it to proceed. But if you went a little faster or other people got more involved with the process, I thought there was a lot of pressure. Mr. Davis, who you spoke about, was involved with that. The Head Start program was just starting up about that time here.
I think one of the points that you bring up, because some of them here will say, well, when did all that happen? What really happens is that there were some things going on in Southampton that we were not aware of. So we didn't know the fire department was downtown marching like that, and they were doing that. So that's a piece that,
Well, when we started out from it, Porterville, the firehouse was empty, and I firemen down here? And I jokingly said to my husband, are the firemen out? And it turned out all the volunteer firemen were out and stationed at, so there was like a man at David White's lane station. And as we headed towards it, we had to drop kids off, our kids off with somebody take care of them. At first I made a joke of it. I didn't mean it that way, but it turned out that all the volunteer firemen were out. And then, you know, and like, actually there were people that took pictures of all of us marching, that those pictures then ended up in the Southampton Village Police Department. I mean, I just thought it was very intimidating, that whole thing we went through that day.
What year was this one?
I'd have to think back on it. We had moved to the house, so it would have been early mid-60s. And there was also a group formed here of...
yeah, when you say the group form, I think you're going back to the beginning of Head Start years, to the beginning of a youth group that we used to have that was across from...
It was even before that, Mr. Dozier.
Okay.
You were very young then, I remember, when you came on, but there was a what's the national...
NAACP?
No, the earlier activist one that...
Marcus Garvey.
No, nothing earlier. He and Martin Luther King...
Malcolm X?
No. This is like...
No, Sherwood, Jesse wasn't born.
Yes, Core. It was called SCORE, because it was SCORE.
Congress of Racial...
No, it was Southampton Committee on Racial Equality.
Yeah, that was Mr. Mickey Johnson.
Yes.
I remember all that. I remember that they formed. They were some of the first ones who got Head Start
That's
here.
right.
We had a youth group, a building that was over on Hampton Road, and was quite involved with it. But let me say this, as we really begin to wrap up.
But I saw that the question was asked, how was that reacted here? And it was fine if you proceeded at a certain pace that some of the local people who had started it as friendly, so if they wanted to see that. And I felt it was very negative at some point.
All right. I think there are quite a few negative things that you probably could do. Let's do this though. I think to the credit of Southampton, that there always was someone that they could communicate with. There always have been dialogue with the African American community and the white community. I think that's been very key to nothing being explosive and to things moving at the rate or where they did. I think that's one of the aspects. I think Southampton community was like any other community that was afraid of the whites and what was going on in the Black Panthers. And I think these are things that was real.
And I agree with you. The Methodist minister there, I can't remember his name. It was the Methodist. It was his daughter died later.
Belzy. Howard Belzy.
What a nice gentleman he was. And he was very positive. And before Head Start, he let us set up in the Methodist Church a daily Head Start program. Really nice gentleman.
Okay, we're going to end here, and we're going to end with an Ethiopian proverb, which simply says that when spider webs unite, they can tie up a lion. And that's something that we feel as part of this community. And we want to thank you all for coming out and sharing.
Thank you all so much. Thank you for coming. And I hope you'll stay around for a little while, listen to some good music, and enjoy some refreshments. Thank you.